Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Microlearning Under the Microscope webinar. We will be starting at 2 o'clock. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We will be starting in about 2 minutes. Dr. Quinn has joined us, and he will be loading the presentation shortly for everybody to view.
Hello. I've never done this group, so we should be.
Let me check before we begin. Are you hearing me and seeing the picture?
Yes, we are.
Excellent.
How do we see the pictures?
It's in the screen share. If you're in through the link on a computer, you'll be able to see the picture.
The links, the Zoom conference, the Quicken Loan?
Yep.
Yeah. Pick another one? There were two? Yeah. It's Android.
The first URL should just be for entering through the web.
Okay. I'm just looking for the meeting. Okay. Here we go.
Dr. Quinn, did you stop sharing your screen?
I did. I realized since I'm not using video, I was going to do something else here. I will start it again in just a minute.
Okay. All right. I'm going to go ahead and get started with introductions. Thank you, everybody, again for joining us. My name is Jenny Bauman. I am the president for the Division of Organizational Training and Performance for AECT. Today's webinar is going to be on microlearning under the microscope. Microlearning is the buzzword of the day, but do we really know what it is? People seem to be using it to describe a variety of things. It's performance support, it's spaced learning, it's a floorwax and a dessert topping. It's whatever we want it to be or will sell. There are some important possibilities in here, but we have to tease them out. In this session, we'll go through the possible meanings, make clear what real advantage and what's misleading, and we'll make proposals for what needed to really capitalize. Come make sense of microlearning. And today's presentation is going to be with Dr. Clark Quinn. He provides strategic learning technology solutions to Fortune 500, government, not-for-profit, and education. Internationally known consultant, speaker, and author of 5 books, as well as numerous articles and chapters. He integrates a deep understanding of thinking and learning with broad experience in technology to improve organizational execution, innovation, and ultimately performance. I will put his blog and his Twitter handle in the chat for anybody who's interested in following him. And Dr. works on behalf of clients through Quinnovation. So over to you, Dr. Quinn.
Well, thank you very much for that gracious introduction, Jennifer. Welcome to you all. I appreciate you being here today with me. Those who know me know I like to start with a calm image to help us relax and get into the correct mental state before the carnage begins. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Good. So we've heard the phrase microlearning. It's suddenly ubiquitous, which is indicative of marketing hype. But the real question is there any there? And I think I've been trying to unpack this and make sense of what's going on, and I thought I'd share with you what my thinking is. And really the question is this a panacea or is it snake oil? Which of these are we actually seeing with microlearning? Can we make sense of it? Can we find the panacea perhaps hidden in the snake oil? So I want to put microlearning under the microscope. I always find it easier to listen to someone when I have a visual image. So I'm sorry to subject you to the cruelty of my picture, but I hope it makes it easier to hear, and I promise to jump away almost immediately. Just as Jennifer mentioned, I'm Quinn. I'm at Quinnovation. I'm at Quinnovator on Twitter if you're the type of person who tweets things as you go. And welcome. Unfortunately, I can't seem to see the chat at the same time. No, I can't seem to see the chat at the time I screen share. So unfortunately, I won't be able to.
Dr. Quinn, if you are not in full screen view, you'll be able to open the chat and see both.
No, when I do the screen share, I only end up seeing my own screen. And, so no worries. I was going to have you practice using the chat, but please, for each other, put your name and your role, and then Jennifer, I'll ask you to sort of summarize how many of different types of people, your role, the organization, and your location. I'm curious where you all are coming from, and I'm interested to see, how many of you might be academics, how many of you might be instructional designers working in academic institution, how many are coming from other places and where those places are. So I welcome hearing that. If people are being so kind as to contribute?
Yes, we do have quite a few people contributing. Let's see, we have Director of Curriculum, Barbara Hall, with us from North Central University in Chapel Hill. Rose Chicago Judge Learning Solutions, instructional designer. Myself, I'm an instructional designer at GP Strategies in Detroit. Ashley MacArthur, an HR director in California. Chad Michael Iyer, he's in Pensacola. He's a master's student at UWF, a trainer at Apple. Steve, I always mess up your last name, Steve, so I'm not even going to try. Professor of Organizational Performance and Workplace Learning at Boise State.
Good day, Steve.
We have Dr. Boileau, Tim Boileau. He's faculty at UWF in Pensacola. Megan, she's an instructional designer at Indiana University Northwest in Gary, Indiana. Sylvia Rogers, she's curriculum administrator at Harrison School of Pharmacy at Auburn. Min Yoon is an instructional designer at University of Utah. And we have 7 instructors from Language Institute in Colorado on the phone. You're an instructional designer from Kent State. So we're kind of across the board. We have students, faculty, and practitioners all on here.
That's great. I appreciate it. Looks like Tim may be here as well. Thank you all for sharing. And I'm going to similarly subject you to a little bit of my background, just so you understand the strange and twisted way I look at the world, and you can filter my comments through that understanding. So I saw the connection between computers and learning as an undergraduate, and I designed my own major, and it's been my career ever since. It's taken some twists and turns. I've been an academic. I've worked in organizations. Of late, I've been working as an independent consultant. But what I've found myself doing is helping individuals and organizations use technologies in ways that align with how we think, work, and learn. I went back and got a PhD in applied cognitive science, and that's intersection of cognitive science and learning science with emerging technologies, and applying that to help improve things is sort of what I do, and you'll see that sort of cognitive focus continuing. It's led to a lot of things: games, mobile, learning technology strategy, and most recently, a focus on learning science and debunking the learning myths that are plaguing our industry. But that's sort of a quick overview of my role as the proprietor and chief everything officer at Quinnovation. So, digging in, micro-learning. When we unpack the phrase, we've got 2 basic concepts: small bits of learning. And the question is, what does that mean? And so we can ask ourselves, well, what do small bits of learning mean? Are we trying to just learn something in the moment, just one thing, or are we breaking up learning into smaller chunks? We have these pieces, and the question is, how do we put them together? How do we figure out what they mean? Well, one meaning could be just a small standalone. The title of my blog, Learnlets, came from somebody once asked, what did we see as the future of learning technology? And I said, small little bits of learning that'll teach you how to do anything, including how to design small little bits of learning. And I actually liked that and put it in his writing, and I've never figured out how to recover where that was. But does this make sense? Can we, in fact, do small little bits of learning? And while I think there may be a few unique instances, in general, I want to say no. In general, I want to say trying to communicate anything of any reasonable complexity is unlikely to be a one-shot deal. Yes, there are things that are small enough and instances where you're just right for the right next thing. But that's not what's, the latter, the former is generally unusual, and the latter is extraordinarily hard to accomplish. And thus, in general, I want to say the notion of an independent learning event doesn't make sense. However, I do want to say that one of the meanings that has been attributed to microlearning, they talk about, oh, well, you get the how-to video. It's just short and it shows you how to do it. Absolutely. I am a big fan of that. I did it myself when the dryer in my house was broken, I found a video that helped me, diagnose what was wrong and replace the part that was broken, and I ran again. Here's the thing, it's not learning. I don't remember what I did. If it happened again, I'd have to go back and find the video. Now that's okay, particularly in organizations. Having somebody succeed in the moment is okay. That's just, but it isn't likely to lead to learning unless it happened a lot. So this is really just performance support. And performance support is great, but calling that microlearning is kind of, why are you calling it microlearning? You're calling it performance support. There's lots of roles for job aids of different types, like lookup tables and decision trees and calculators. There are all sorts of powerful, wonderful things we can do to help people in the moment without them having to learn something. And as things increasingly change faster, we're facing more unique and ambiguous situations. Trying to put it in the head doesn't make sense. Putting it in the world makes a lot of sense. In fact, there's a famous quote, and I'm going to have a senior moment who said it. But inside every fat training course, there's a small job aid trying to get out. I think that's true more often than we wish to know. Certainly in the corporate space. So nothing wrong with that, but it's performance support. How about the situation where we have multiple objects spaced out over time trying to create a full learning experience? Indeed, this could be something that happens. And a lot of people, again, when they talk about microlearning, their short and fast statement is, we're going to take your big course, we're going to cut it up into little chunks distributed over time, and it's going to be, people are going to enjoy it more, and they're going to pay attention more, and it's going to be more effective. Oh,
okay.
Great. Sorry?
Come here.
Is somebody trying to ask a question?
Come here.
Somebody's just got background noise and needs to mute, I think. But before I go on with this, indeed, I should stop and say, were there any questions on that on that first take? And Jennifer, you'd be kind enough to see if there's any questions that emerge in the chat and pass them on. Or if people say, okay, good to go, you guys, ready to move on? Are you with me so far?
It looks like we're good to go.
Okay.
And somebody said that quote you gave was from Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah. He also said, don't believe everything you learn on the internet. But I think it was either Rumler or Geary, one of the famous sort of performance consulting ISPI types. I'm pretty sure Guy Wallace quotes it regularly. I just can't recall off the top of my head. That external job aids would be helpful right now, right?
Right. We do have one quick question before you go.
Sure.
Does learning require practice to mastery?
Does learning require math?
Does
Yes.
learning require practice to mastery? And then follow up to that was and reflection.
I believe learning is action and reflection. We do things in the world, reflect on it, that's when learning can happen. I believe then instruction is designed action and guided reflection. I think you need to be doing things. You can't be passive. You have to be taking knowledge and applying it and getting feedback for learning to occur. And that's why the one shot might work when you have just done something and we can provide feedback that just solidifies it at that perfect moment. But I'm not inclined to believe that tends to happen as one shot. I believe that you need, spaced and varied retrieval practice, and we're going to get there. So I do believe learning is instruction is designed action, guided reflection. So let's talk about that. So back to the story of taking our course, where we have present concepts and examples and practice, and breaking it up over time is one version that has been touted for microlearning as well. And I want to suggest that doesn't make sense. If you've designed a course to be effective, breaking them, spreading out over time doesn't account for certain things that we have that occur. Most of our courses we design aren't well designed in general because they tend to be dump a bunch of information in an event-based model. Breaking it up makes sense, but there's a problem that keeps it from working, and that is that knowledge atrophies. And if you're not connecting, if you don't have a deep design for that spacing behind it, it doesn't work. If you do, it can. I do believe that this is a powerful mechanism for learning, where we break it up and we present little bits and then we reactivate it and strengthen it and broaden upon it this varied spaced retrieval practice that, you know, Erickson talks about in, well, no, Roediger and Brown talk about make it stick. This is the stuff that matters. This is the stuff we need to be working on. But this is spaced learning. This is, you know, if you want to say microlearning is spaced learning, okay. I like spaced learning, it's a good thing. But why are we adding a new label? Except perhaps if it gives us, you know, I don't mind if using that label will get us to do more better stuff, but it gets confused with that notion, oh, if I just break up my course, I'm doing spaced learning. No, because there's a lot of complexity that goes into doing that right. You've got to start having models of the knowledge, and the knowledge that a person has is a function of their acquisition of it minus its deterioration over time. You look at Duolingo and it reactivates, but it keeps track and goes, you know, you should go back, these things have atrophied a bit. Ideally, it gets worked out that the more complex things you do are reactivated naturally, but you've got to build a model of that. And just thinking that I break up a course and that's going to lead to it sticking better is kind of a naive assumption. So I don't mind if it's spaced learning, but I want it spaced learning with all the nuances, and maybe referring to spaced learning is a better way to help emphasize that we need this richer picture. So that's where we're at. Let me stop again and say, are there any questions, issues? Do people want to raise anything? Is this making sense to you so far? And I welcome challenges. We're zooming through this at this pace, so I would really like to stop and make sure I'm addressing any issues, concerns, questions, terminology, and even just comments on what you're seeing. And
I'm going to give a moment.
mm-hmm.
We do have somebody saying so far so good.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
And they're taking it all in.
Nobody minds the fact that I'm not using, in general, using bullet points and such to try and make my points.
No, I think nobody's missing the bullet points, and they're saying thank you. But I think we're good to move forward at this point.
Okay. So what could microlearning mean?
You know what? I do have two questions. I talk too fast. The first question is, so microlearning is essentially a marketing term for older proven concepts like job aids, performance support, and spaced learning?
That's what most of it is. In fact, that's pretty much what all of it is. I will give, where I'm going next will be a possible interpretation that I think is unique and valuable, but I don't think that's what most people are talking about. J.D. Dillon just put out a paper. It's paper from Exonify. He works for them, but it's a relatively decent presentation about, I think, what microlearning could be, sort of what I'm talking about, although more the spaced learning picture. But yes, I would agree. And the other question?
Yes, there's a couple more. Do you see microlearning in utility/practice as more of a primer?
Do I see it in utility stroke business as more of a primer? No, I see it as a follow-on. One of the things I had struggled with in thinking of this breaking up spaced learning is I think there's sort of some minimum level of foundation you need to get before you can reactivate. And the amount of work it would take to get you to build you up slowly from ground zero or even from wherever you are, I think there's an opportunity to, or perhaps the most sense is made by giving some initial stuff that's bigger than microlearning. Let's get you hooked in emotionally, help you understand why. Let's give you the first basic concept. Let's put it in place with an example. Let's give you your first practice. Let's give you feedback on that. So you sort of get bootstrapped up to a point where microlearning makes sense. Is it a primer? Well, and I'm somewhat a fan of the 70-20-10 with the caveat that my colleague Charles Jennings is in the Internet Time Alliance is one of the biggest proponents. But that notion of after we stop doing formal learning, we're instituting coaching and practice when you're performing, and then we're giving you assignments that continue to develop and challenge that and give you the support to internalize and become self-monitoring. All that I think makes part of a big picture, in which case microlearning is a primer like most formal courses are. But I don't know, so I suppose I should turn that around and ask for an elaboration of what was meant by a primer. I was inferring sort of like the stuff that gets you up to the ready to start learning, and I think it's more follow-on. But if I misinterpreted what primer means, I may have to change my answer.
Brandon, would you like to jump in and elaborate on the question, or did that answer it? He was inferring what you interpreted, and he said it makes a lot more sense. He agrees with the term isn't well defined, and he appreciates the webinar today. We do have another question here. If you do break up a painfully long learning module into chunks, would you recommend intentionally linking concepts from previous modules to avoid atrophy?
Absolutely. Well, either explicitly linking, which is better, because if those previous concepts are revisited in this new one, if it's sort of an integration of them, you absolutely should point out those connections. But the other thing to do, and this is sort of the varied practice that Roediger and Brown summarize from research of others and their own, is that mixing things in. So it may not be connected, it's just interstitially spaced. So as you're moving forward, you go back and throw in a few things from the old things, whether they're linked or not, just reactivating them, depending on, as I had that formula showing sort of what your estimate of the deterioration of that knowledge is. So a couple of the models I've seen for some of this new adaptive learning is they're building explicit models when they think these things are deteriorating and come in arguably at the point where it's most, it's just about to decay, because reactivating decaying stuff, but catching at that moment is arguably, that I have seen arguments that state that that's the most optimal time, but reactivating it clearly is necessary. And if you're presenting something complex that involves a number of different concepts, the early ones, primacy, recency effect, are going to decay, and you want to re-energize them, whether through connections or separate reactivation activities.
And that kind of follows along with the other comment that we have here. It's somebody chimed in when you were explaining the primer section. It seems like you would either need push mechanism to remind learners they should be taking the next learning, or else embed recall of prior learning in each new tidbit.
Yes. It depends on the model of learner engagement. Is it pull or push? I'm sort of assuming in this situation a push model that says, here's your next thing. It comes to you through email or through your app or through text message or whatever. We have so many channels available on these mobile devices these days, or it could come in your desktop as well. But the point is that it says, okay, here's something you should be doing. You can put it off for 15 minutes or something if you're in the midst of a meeting, but it sends you a notification that the next thing is ready for you. Then when you do it, it might be the new stuff or it might be a reactivation. When I talk about reactivation, I think of three different things. Reconceptualization, in other words, a new way of looking at it, a different model, going back to sort of Spiro's cognitive flexibility theory that says different models increase the likelihood that it will get activated. It could be a recontextualization, in other words, another example that illustrates it in practice that helps broaden the space in which you've seen it applied, which helps support transfer. And then, or it could be a reapplication, which of course is best. Another challenge of applying that knowledge to a context. So it's basically a practice item or an assessment item, depending on how you want to view it. I sort of use those terms interchangeably for principled reasons. But the notion is that, yes, we are varying it up, we're mixing it up, and but right at the rate at which we think things are dissipating.
Thank you. That's all of our questions for now.
Okay, we'll move on. So we have our thinking about questions, but we also want to think about what is there some unique meaning we could attribute to microlearning that might be valuable and something that isn't done? And I think I have argued that there is. And there's no situation where you shouldn't be able to sneak a picture of your child into the presentation, right? She's in college now, but the notion here is layering on information on top of something already going on. And this is, to me, what's really interesting is contextualized learning. So because of where and when you are, we add some information on top of it. It might be a performance support situation. One of the things I've asked, and Bob Mosher and Conrad Gottfredson, who wrote the book Innovative Performance Support, which really is essential performance support, I've asked them, and they've insisted, Bob in particular has insisted he's seen this, I haven't, where it's not just performance support. It's not just helping you in the moment, but it's also connecting a little bit to some conceptual material that you've seen before. So it's turning into a learning moment as well. So say you're learning about negotiation and you have a negotiation meeting. Not only does it support you in the moment with a little tool, but it then evaluates how you think you did and what went well and what you still might want to work harder on. So we're turning that performance experience. We can be providing performance support, but we're adding a connection layer to it that explains why it's this way. And or because of where and when you are, and we know you have a goal about, say, learning about geology, and you happen to be going through a valley, it could talk about whether that valley was created by erosion, by rivers, by glaciers, or something else that would be interesting. What caused the uprising, what sort of type of rock there is, whether it's sedimentary or igneous or whatever. So it's using your current context. Now, one of the things about most formal learning is we create artificial contexts and in which to perform. So we write little scenarios, we create simulations, we do role plays, all away from the performance. And that's smart if the real performance is going to be costly in some way. We don't want you practicing live for your initial flying lessons. We don't want you performing live for your initial surgery. We would like to scaffold you up to the point where there's a very low likelihood that you're going to do any permanent and costly damage. But in other situations or as scaffolding, too often, particularly in corporate learning, but I think this happens in higher ed, we don't often enough focus on application, but in corporate learning, we give sort of an event-based training because we can manage that and cost it and deliver it in ways that we used to be unable to surpass. And so we couldn't do this contextualized, but we have the ability now. We have devices with incredible sensors, and we have the ability in our systems to detect what we're doing either at the interface on our desktop or when we're out and about, and we can start doing this. And the question is, what does it take? And I want to suggest that that's a potential opportunity for a new form of microlearning that is, it can be micro because you don't have to add in the context. The context is already there, so you only have to layer on a little bit extra to turn it from a performance opportunity to a learning opportunity as well. Now, this is non-trivial. In addition to that knowledge atrophy issue of, do you have the prerequisites still for this particular moment to work, we also need to know about, the assessment of your current ability is a function of your performance on that skill and this context. It's a complex intersection. And then we have to have a way of assessing and mapping context in. And I, by the way, completely made up these formulas. The notion is just to represent the underlying concepts as opposed to these, obviously I haven't specified what the functions are. And I may have misdone the context, but the point is we have to know about the context, the relevance of that context to the performance, what performance in that involves, what it means, and how we assess it, and then add that to the performance. And so it's non-trivial. I think these are really interesting research areas. This is the place I've been thinking about for, I wrote an article for Educational Technology well over a decade ago, some 12, 14 years ago, that suggested that this was a way we could go, and I've been interested in pursuing it. I think this is a definition of microlearning that we should be jumping on. We are seeing so much more contextual stuff. We can do geofencing. We can do where you specify an area or it recognizes that when you get close to the shop, it brings up your shopping list for that shop and says, if you wanted to go there, you're near there, you can pick up these things now. And I just today saw IBM is doing its pattern recognition stuff with Watson connected to Apple's AR kit. So you can start looking at things and it can start recognizing them and doing things specific to that situation on complex devices or anything else you can train. So we now have the tools to do this. And I've been thinking, longer ago, I was thinking of just simple things. So much of our context-sensitive support is where you are, looking at the GPS. I use Yelp a lot and say, what's near me where I am, and can you show me where it is? But I think the missed opportunity is when we are looking at our calendar and recognizing that that event on our calendar is this type of performance event and it's related to this type of learning goal. So if we can do that mapping of context to learning goal, and then we can go in and assess how you did on that learning goal in that context, we can start to, and we can look at decay, and if you're not getting another performance event soon enough, we can put in an artificial one that we've created. But we can start distributing learning and making it very context sensitive and ubiquitous, and it's a coach. It could be doing performance support as well. When I think about what my ultimate learning experience would be, it would be having a personal mentor who wanders around, who's really wise and keeps me from making mistakes I'm liable to make in the moment. And while that would be extraordinarily costly and possibly intrusive, having it available through a device ubiquitously, I think is a goal. That's one of the design approaches I've suggested in the past is, what would you do if you had magic? Because that helps remove any constraints you might prematurely be limiting your design solution to and say, what would I do? And then you can go back and say, how close can we get to that? And Arthur C. Clarke famously said, any truly advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. I kind of think we're there with our mobile devices. We can bring anything, any place. The limitations are not the technology. They're now between our ears. And what can we do? So this leads me to my penultimate slide. What does that stir for you? Where are you at on definitions of microlearning, opportunities to apply it? What might you put in place? I'll leave this open for your thoughts and questions and issues, barriers, things I should be aware of. And I'll give you a moment to type in your responses. Are we getting anything, Jennifer?
Not yet, but I've learned that I talk faster than the typing shows up.
I resemble that remark.
If you're not comfortable in typing but you'd like to voice an opinion, do feel free to unmute your phones and speak up as well. We do have a question. Oh, we do have a comment here. If microlearning equals contextualized, whoops, sorry, my chat bounced on me. If microlearning equals contextualized performance support, then it would seem that app development may represent another opportunity of IDs and performance improvement folks.
Absolutely. I absolutely think that's true, that going from, pull performance support is contextualized because you're pulling what you need. You may not know what the best thing available is. Having support for that choice is great. I led a project where there was a complex medical device, and they wanted an electronic performance support system, which was really a contextualized help system. And in fact, I wrote, documented the different contexts that device could be in, and then we had a whole list, as a medical device, they had full listings of all the procedures that device could accomplish, and processes you could apply to that device because it's required by the FDA. So we had experts connect likelihoods of aspects to those events and to those processes, or to do the mapping, and then we could, when somebody hit the help button, it could give them a list of what we thought was most likely. They could still browse for other things, which is a strongly improvement over them trying to remember or search for what they were looking for. Even more so if we can push, and with XAPI machine learning now, we can start looking and seeing correlations between people who use X do better than people who don't use X, and start proactively going, we'd like you to use this tool for this process at this time. So as we can start specifying the desired behaviors, or tracking and discovering what works best, we can start putting that into smart systems that can be more proactive in figuring out it's time for if we over time have demonstrated that one of us I forget things much faster than Jennifer does. If we're both taking the same thing, I might need more reactivation of concepts than she would because she's smarter than I am. These are, as we start building smart models and rules, we have the capability to embed this into our delivery systems and not do it one size fits all. And this, I think, is what's on tap. Does that answer the question?
It was a statement, so yes.
Yeah.
We have a couple more questions for you.
Sure.
Megan asks, do you see this term microlearning being used with a specific group in higher education, i.e. traditional students, non-traditional students, etc.? And to piggyback off that, Chad said students with disabilities. Do you see this being used with a specific group?
I don't. Could it be differentially used? Possibly. If we could create, one of the things I think microlearning requires is some redundancy in content development, so we can start finding multiple examples and document, and we might match, for instance, to your role. I was talking with an organization about this, that They have people taking the same course, but they work in different roles. So interesting, some people may work in a hospital, some people may work in a clinic, some people may work in private practice. If they're taking something, there are differences. We might first show examples that are similar to them and then give them different ones. But if I'm in a hospital, I'd more likely see a hospital first and a clinic and community or private practice later, whereas working in private practice, I would see that first. So in that sense, now, in saying that, we could similarly have differentiation in modality. So it might be audio versus text for people who are visually limited, for instance. If we wanted to, or could do that, we could create differential presentations depending on people's preferences or indicated characteristics. My fallback, of course, is just this makes for better learning. It increases likelihood of retention over time, and well designed, it leads to better transfer to all appropriate, no inappropriate situations. As I said up front, it requires more rigorous content design. But I think the upside is the ability for traditional students, for distance or part-time students, you might change the rules for them, but at the end of the day, my goal is just to make sure we're getting it at the right time, so what needs to be there is still there. Then we might think about, well, maybe that might drive us back to the curriculum and say, well, in this case and with these tools, is our curriculum appropriate for what needs to be retained and transferred? But that's a secondary on-flow. So yes, we can start doing microlearning contextualized for the person as well. Although so far the research, for instance, on learning styles, you look at Pasher et al. Have suggested that there's no evidence that you should adapt on the basis of the learner, but that's on their preferences in learning. But specific disabilities absolutely seems to me to make sense, as well as adapting to the learning and the learner's exhibited performance and abilities, as opposed to characteristics that are, you know, whether personality or other aspects.
Thank you. Another question we have here, it says, implementation tidbit in a world that just wants PowerPoint to solve all its training needs.
Well,
that's what it says.
Yeah, it's a big issue. People who don't understand learning, and unfortunately that's not only in the executives and managers sometimes, but it's also in the case, too many people were good at their job, so they said, oh, well, since you know it, you can teach it. And then once they could teach it, said, we're going to e-learning, so you're going to design e-learning around it. And it's not their fault, but they've been thrust in the position of having design learning. And so other people are given large amounts of PowerPoints and PDFs and told to turn around a course in a week, and they have little recourse but to cram that into the authoring tool, the PowerPoints, and add quizzes and say that's e-learning because that's the parameters under which they're rewarded. This is a broken model of learning, and yet it's prevalent. So when we say, you know, in a world that just wants PowerPoints, that's an uninformed world, and part of my mission in life is to campaign for learning science and cognitive science in what we do. And I was very fortunate. I did my PhD in a lab that was applying cognitive science to design systems that better align with how we think, and my sort of twist on it, design systems for how we learn. But a world that wants PowerPoints is a world that needs changed.
I think most of us can agree with that. And I think Ashley actually commented while you were talking, and so did Kate. Kate agreed with everything you said, and she agrees that that's something we need to move away from. Ashley commented that it's a difference between a SME and an instructional designer. We do have some more questions. Tim's asking, what are your thoughts in microlearning in support of personalized learning in different social/cultural contexts?
Interesting. Tim, when I taught, it was overseas in Australia, and we had a lot of students from different learning cultures. And so I took a workshop on accommodating different learning cultures, and they busted some myths. There was this myth that Asian culture is, they learn by rote and recite back, and that's all they can do. And they said, no, that's what's rewarded. They honor scholarship. And the way they honor their scholars repeating back what they've heard, but that doesn't mean they're stupid and can't learn in any other ways. And their takeaway was, and what I've taken to heart is, use the best learning design. If people from other cultures have struggled within that learning culture, to help them accommodate. As an undergraduate, even, I had a professor who talked about the anthropology of teaching and talked about American Indians, Native Americans, who their culture didn't have a cultural phenomena of calling on people individually. And so this was problematic. How do you get around that? Well, group projects and anonymous, not anonymous, how do I say, submissions to the instructor that aren't public, and you don't necessarily give them public feedback, and yet you're still making sure they're applying their knowledge to meaningful projects and getting feedback. I think helping people accommodate to learning in that way is arguably better. Now, how does that relate to microlearning? I think microlearning, adapting it more to your personal performance helps. It still might not, and I'm a big fan of group assignments, which is more challenging in a microlearning model. So we lose some of the social benefits that can occur when in properly constrained situations. There's group work that's absolutely horrid. My kids lived through it in school, but when you do give people meaningful projects and support for working together in groups and manage ways so that everybody's contributing and collaborating and creating a culture for it, I think that's really powerful. I'm not quite sure how you accomplish that in microlearning. So that's an aspect of learning culture I think microlearning struggles with. I think there's some interesting research areas about how do we do small collaborative projects that might be group learning. How do we synchronize schedules so that people can work together on things, or do it asynchronously and yet have it be small? Interesting research issues. I don't think those are ready for prime time yet.
Thank you. Another question. It says, implementing AI and machine learning techniques in microlearning sounds fascinating. Are there available web resources for those designs and products?
To be honest, I don't know. There are certainly commercial products available that support you in doing this. You can, Exonify is a corporate one. Cerigo, although I have problems with its, the example they provide is going to be bad for transfer, although it could be good for retention if it doesn't support transfer as well. I worry about it. So there are commercial products. I don't know of anybody providing open source tools. Like Eris is a fabulous open source tool for doing augmented reality. I don't know of any such equivalents for microlearning, specifically for creating rules around it. That's a really interesting project. Somebody should make that a PhD thesis. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge, wink, wink. But I don't, unfortunately, I don't know of any, is my short answer.
All right.
I'm welcome to be wrong and have people let us know of some they happen to be aware of.
Okay, we have a few comments here. Steve says, so it seems that we need to start shaping a conversation that moves from microlearning as short how-to video, and we're just going to break down larger courses, to an opportunity for contextualized performance support / apps that help people do their jobs in ways that meet business goals. And Stephanie said she fully agrees. She's working on a grant to work with school divisions on this, and they said they're seeing a richer product when they treat it the way that Steve described.
I couldn't agree more, and Steve, you're absolutely right that trying to, I think there's real benefits if we can create good models of context and good mappings from context to support. We can grossly increase or at least significantly impact success of individuals in the moment, and then develop them over time as well, which ultimately is my goal. I think it should be performance and development instead of learning or training and development. It should be about how do we help people succeed more often, more frequently, whenever and wherever they are, and then how do we continue to develop them over time at a rate that's consonant with the way our brains work. And I think I'm really interested in that research grant that's getting better results. I welcome you. You'll see my contact details on the next slide.
Go ahead.
Maybe I'll just put up my final slide right now so you can see any coordinates, and then we can continue the questions as people want, or they can drop off as they wish as well.
I do have some more comments for you and questions too. Let's see. The next one was for graduate level study, especially for online programs, I find that it's always a challenge to achieve depth. Microlearning can be an ancillary tool, but doesn't seem appropriate as a primary tool. Does not seem appropriate as a primary mode of delivery of content. I recently had a master's student request microlearning because she's busy, and yes, we're all busy, but I hope microlearning won't become something like an entitlement for graduate students. It seems like a concession to shallow learning.
Like many things, I think that's all in the implementation. Microlearning could be quite deep because it's reactivating more frequently. It could be asking you challenging questions. My application-based design model, is about how do we give you meaningful activities that require you to integrate knowledge, apply it to meaningful work products. Although it depends on the level of challenge. I wish we could get more application happening in classrooms and meaningful discussion going, which is hard to do because it tends to require a fair amount of human intervention to do the assessment. I would agree that I do not want to use microlearning as a way to dumb down anything. I think I was working for an organization and we were developing this blended learning model that had a more rigorous upfront preparation with good concepts and chance to apply it. And you'd bring that into the classroom. That'd be the first thing you'd discuss, and you'd apply it some more. Then you'd follow up after the classroom with elaborating activities that would help cement it and create the necessary diversity to support the appropriate transfer and things. Again, it begins to verge on the, is this really micro anymore at the point? But if you broke those up into chunks, I would agree that you can't just expect higher education to be easy and convenient. If you're digging into something substantially, and too much of higher education isn't necessarily substantial, it's a bunch of information dump, he says cynically. But when it's done well, it should be digging into it deeply, and I'm not sure that that can be done completely conveniently. As much as we would love to make it accessible to all, real world constraints emerge, and we have to deal with it. I'm going to briefly mention, most thoughts that appear ultimately in books or presentations first show up on my blog. In fact, today's blog post is a diagram that represents the topic we just talked about today. There's a couple posts a week, so it's not too onerous. Again, on Twitter, there's sites for each of the books where you can download sample chapters and things. If you haven't, please check out the Serious E-Learning Manifesto. It's sort of an effort to try and make a push for just the quality in learning that we've already talked about. I hope this has made sense. I hope you found it valuable, and I continue to welcome your questions and further comments. Jennifer.
Well, in regards to the last thing you were talking about, Greg said he does see value in the various forms of microlearning in other contexts, and he liked the idea you said about elaborating activities. Chad has a comment here saying, I'm involved at some on-the-job training in my organization now. Following the instructor-led components that cover multiple contexts within a complex role, trainers historically provide real-time resources for specific contexts via chat. We are creating a chat bot now to automatically respond with appropriate resources / job aids for each new context the trainee works in. Seems like this is some form of integrating tech and microlearning, and I didn't even know it.
I think you're right. I think, when you had humans, I once, the issue a long time ago, we were developing an adaptive learning system, and the issue was what was the right level of granularity. And I wrote an article saying, on principle, the right thing is what's the smallest thing you give to one person to the next person. And what you were describing with those follow-up job things that were available via chat from the experts were saying, I need help this, I need a tool for this, and they would send you one. Automating that with a chatbot is a perfect opportunity to use chatbot technology to do things that are repetitive. It requires some knowledge, and yet you can build that knowledge into the system, and you can make a query and it will send you the right thing. And sending that little right thing is microlearning in that form of performance support. And it could also be an educational resource, in which case it becomes a bit of learning. So I suddenly need to know more about, today in the paper they were talking about vocal fry and how hard it was to transcribe and listen to if you were a court reporter. And I didn't know what vocal fry was. And Google is a chatbot, right? I type in vocal fry and there's the Wikipedia entry and a sample. And I learned. It's doing that specifically for your organization's needs and your learners' needs is a fabulous tool, whether it's a chatbot or just a federated search with really good tagging. And arguably microlearning, depending on your definition.
And Chad, you got some comments in the chat. I don't know if you saw everything, saying that it's an interesting idea and it's definitely microlearning. They all agree that it's interesting how you're conceptualizing that performance support and automating that as you can.
At this point, I do want to say thanks to all of you for your time that you stuck through it, and for all the comments and questions. Really appreciate it. I realize we're coming to the top of the hour, so I'm happy to continue on, but I just wanted to make sure that if you need to get on to other things, I say thank you very much for your time and effort and being here and attention.
I have finished with all the comments and questions I currently have in the chat.
Okay, in which case I might stop sharing my screen and look at the chat myself. And again, thank you all, and found it valuable, and get on, enjoy the rest of your day.
And for anybody who did state that they joined a little late, this recording will be posted on our YouTube channel within the week. So you'll have access to this information at a later time.
All right, well, thanks, and hello to everybody. And now I'm seeing your nice comments in the chat. Much appreciated. Thank you all again. And yes, great, it will be available. Appreciate it. And thank you, Jennifer, for your hosting and help with the chat.
You're welcome.
No worries, great. At this point, I think I will sign off and leave you all to the rest of your Wednesday.
All right, thank you very much for your presentation.